Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Duty Honor Real Estate. And we're in episode 21. Can you do something for me? We got here Mr. Dave Schulz in the house. Welcome.
Thank you.
No. So we're going to get right into it. And this is going to be a very special episode. This is where we start really getting into leadership and real estate. And that's what's great about Duty Honor Real Estate. It's not just about money and numbers and houses and real estate. It's about people, because real estate is a people's business. So Dave, for those of who don't know who you are, who's Dave Schulz?
Well, thanks, Bryan, for having me. I was a career Army officer before I transitioned to the civilian sector. And, I started out as an enlisted guy. I joined as an E1. And then my education service officer said, hey, you should think about becoming an officer. And I said, what's that? And I actually had bad leadership at the NCO level that said, okay, well, what do I got to do to outrank them? And they said, you just got to wait your time. I said, but then they'll outrank me if I just wait time. And they said, well, unless you become an officer. And then I said, well, what do I got to do to become an officer? And they said, oh, you just got to get a 4-year degree. And I said, oh, okay. So then that's what led me to become an officer, was really having bad leadership. And I went to school, became an officer, chose to go infantry. It was at the height of both wars. So I got to serve as a platoon leader and company commander on the ground in Afghanistan and Iraq. And then transitioned over to become a foreign area officer, where I served as a diplomat in Latin America. And then I was selected for some pretty choice assignments. So there my career kind of really took off in a very untraditional route. So first, the NORAD Northcom commander here in Colorado Springs selected me to be his. I was like an aide-de-camp / foreign policy advisor. And then I got selected to be a White House fellow. Went to Washington, D.C., served in the White House, both in the Chief of Staff office and in the Secretary of Homeland Security's office. And then I got selected to go help stand up Army Futures Command in Austin, Texas. And then that's when I saw the light and I said, I got to get out. Went to work in the private sector in New York City. My wife and 2 kids, we moved to Manhattan. And that's when I took some advice from a mentor that I met through the White House Fellows Program, who said, go take a year off and before you transition to the private sector. Took a year off, and then that's when I really realized, okay, where's my passion? Taking the year off, we're all so busy, right? We're all so busy just with titles, making money, and, so taking that year off really helped me figure out, what do I really want to do when I grow up? What do I want to do after the military? Because when you're in the military, and that's what you do, you become enthralled in this is it. This is what I'm going to do forever. The reality is, those of us that do, whether it's 4 years, 10 years, 20 years, it's a chapter in your life, and you're going to have a life beyond that. And so that's kind of how I got here, and I had some very, very fortunate assignments, very fortunate mentors, and that's how I'm here.
The Book of David, I love it. It's crazy when you talk about your career. It all started with curiosity. It started with a challenge, because of poor leadership, and it's crazy. What if you never took that challenge? The life you've had may have never been the way it is. And so it's great that you had that courage at that time. And so everyone listening, when you feel something inside that, hey, this isn't right, I deserve more, I need more, definitely pursue it. And, we're definitely going to get into your career, but you gave a lot of Costco free samples, Those are some high-level jobs, and you were an infantry officer, a diplomat in multiple countries, a White House fellow, nonprofit leader, still a community advocate. I would imagine there's some continuity, there's some threads that somehow glue all this together, or something that kept it kept you going every new environment, every new stage? Is there like a common denominator?
I think so. Those of us that thrive from overachieving, meaning you salivate, right, from your passion, whether that's sales. I think for an infantry officer, you get taught, most combat arms, probably most Army officers get taught, be the best of the best, right? And that breeds competition. Sometimes at the detriment of relationship building, because you're trying to compete over the next person, right? And that's good, but at the same time, life is about building each other up. It's about team building. And the Army is great at what it does, right? I mean, the core mission of the Army is to fight our nation's wars and to win them. And the Army is just good. And so, but there's second and third order effects of that. And so, to your question about common threads, and, I served both early and late in the war. I think it was those that we lost that were my peers that I knew were better than me. That kept me going, because it was like those guys were much better than me, and they didn't have an opportunity to serve or even, get married and have kids. So that helped, fuel my fire. But then after, I think you get to a certain level of seniority to where you're like, okay, enough is enough, and I need to put up a rearview mirror to help others have opportunities and have successes and give them, a chance to thrive and excel, because, you had it, if that makes sense.
It's funny at West Point, best of the best with honors. That's what, the Men in Black movie pointed out. And it's so funny that, you think there's unity, but it really hurts a lot of relationships because everyone's competing. Yeah. And that's the first thing you do right out the bat. And then you go in the Army, and you could take that same mentality to the Army. So it's great that you bring that up. And so, we're all here on this earth, I think, to help each other reach their potential. And it's good to hear that you see it like, hey, we're here to better each other and to help each other. And one thing that kind of hit hard at home was, you mentioned there's other people that passed away that were better, and it's like they lost that opportunity. You shouldn't even waste it, and so I thought that was really humble, and something for people to understand that you're alive and you have the position. You're in the position to be successful while others can't, and so I think that's really humble. Before we get into some more topics, what's the proudest moment you had in your career? Like what always you remember?
Yeah, I almost think it's a double-edged sword, because my proudest moment doesn't speak about others' command or leadership. But I had a cathartic moment that, I deployed very early in the war, and the amount of kinetic fighting that we did in 2004 had not changed in my 2009 deployment, my 2012 deployment. And so when I finally commanded, I knew that I was not there to win the war. I was not going to win the war on my watch. This was not something that a company grade level officer was going to achieve. And so I had one goal and one goal only. And, it's interesting because that goal did not marry or match up with my hire. I think my hire wanted to win the war on their watch. My goal was to bring every man back alive. That's it. That's all. It was very simple. In 30 months of combat, I can say that every man that served under me, I was able to bring back alive. And so when I look back on my career, which was only a chapter in my life that was not, not defined by that, big chapter in my life, but the fact that I was able to bring back everybody back to their family and their kids, to me, is notable. But that's not to undermine someone that lost somebody in the war, because everybody's leadership is different. But I just knew that I was not going to win the war on my watch.
Yeah, it's probably a mature thing to say, during, if you think about when you were a lieutenant or a young captain at that time.
Sure.
You're high speed and you want to win the war, right? But at the end of the day, you really got to win for those families, for the people we left behind. And so I think that's incredible to lead with that, because I imagine everyone wants to think of their OER bullets versus, hey, I brought everyone home, everyone's safe and sound.
That's right.
So you mentioned about 30 months of combat. That's brutal.
And, that was highly kinetic. I mean, we weren't sitting in the rear. We were out. Every one of those deployments were as an infantry officer, company grade. And, I think that leadership under fire defines me. And I think we're going to talk about transition, but I think, people say that it's hard for veterans to transition. And I always would say BS. Like, what do you mean it's hard? We can do anything. Like, you put us, we can do anything. And that's a true statement. However, the reason it's hard for veterans to transition is because we have been put at a level of stress, at a level of life and death. And so then when we get out, there's BS that we won't put up with, right? Because, we're not going to get stressed over what the normal person would get stressed with. But we have values, we have ethics, we have a certain low common denominator that's higher than our civilian counterparts. And so that's what makes it hard to transition for us, is the fact that we do have ethics, we have values, and we are not going to put up with probably BS that we shouldn't have to, because of the level of complexity that we've already had as leaders.
I definitely like that. But then, do you think those are kind of things you're echoing of what you learned in those 30 months? Like, what were those leadership traits? I mean, 30 months of that crucible, kinetic, I imagine there's a lot of case studies that you bring to the civilian sector. Anything that resonates in those 30 months?
I mean, I think maybe the gravitas of a situation, meaning life or death is going to be up here. Getting something done by Friday is going to be down here, right? And so, and that's also a double-edged sword, I would say, to our veteran community, is that once you've had that pucker factor up here, there's not going to be very much that excites you. And that's a double-edged sword, because you are going to be paid by the civilian industry for your time and expertise. And so they may want your level of energy up here. But because you know what's going to stress you out or where you're at, you may only come up to a certain level that they want more of. And that's why it's a double-edged sword. But I think in the end of the day, our soldiers, sailors, Marine, Airmen, and now Space Force, lives are important. And if you reduce anything, it's the lives that are at stake. And so, when people thanked you for your service, and when people thanked me for your service, when we were wearing our uniform, we didn't think anything of it, right? It was just like, okay, great, yeah, this is almost awkward, right? Or you would say thank you. But the reality is we do an enormous sacrifice on behalf of the country, on behalf of the flag. And so we're closer probably to people that we served with than our own family. we have served so much, that we've given so much of ourselves, that we are an anomaly. And that's a big thing that we take for granted, because we volunteered, right? We weren't drafted, we volunteered, and we did it willfully. And so I think that's a big misnomer, that when people think it's for a service, we're like, yeah, well, whatever, because we did it voluntarily. But the reality is we sacrificed a lot.
What do you think you took to your business and real estate career?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think business, it's a transactional, and it's very black and white, right? Revenue making, and if we can instill leadership in our subordinates, great. But when you're out, you don't have that mission, right? You're not wearing the uniform. And so it's different, because once you get out, it's all about that revenue cycle and what you and your expertise are feeding that revenue cycle. And so there's not this higher cause of national security. There's not this and so I think, to answer your question, you take leadership with you. But I think also you hopefully don't take for granted that you don't have to deploy, that you can come home every night, that you're not going to be in harm's way, or your soldiers aren't going to be in harm's way. So that's, in the business world that I live in, I think that's what I take with me, that, I'm not looking outside my window and seeing bullets, And so you put things in perspective.
Yeah, I mean, your worst case is, I don't know, you miss your TV show.
That you can DVR.
Yeah, that you can DVR, that you can record. No, that's awesome. And so you probably saw a lot of different leaders, both superiors and subordinates, through those 30 months. And in real estate right now, I would say it's challenging for a lot of real estate professionals. We talked about we talk about it all the time. It's like, how can we help the industry? How can we leverage resources and networks to make it more effective? Yeah. What would you think could separate? Like, what was separating leaders who were thriving versus surviving in the military? And then, how does that like translate to the real estate and business world? Because do you think those are hand in hand? Like, you could thrive in the military or survive, and you would have a certain trait, but then when you go to the civilian world, is it applicable? Like, are those traits of people who thrive in the civilian world the same as those who thrive in the military?
Yeah.
Or is it the same? What are those traits that, because you saw both in such high definition?
Yeah, I would say 100%. And I'll give you two analogies. So the leaders that you could tell were chasing a star, and were only captains, right? Like, they weren't even majors yet, but you knew they wanted to be a general. You could tell those people, right? Those were the leaders that were stepping on their peers. Those were the leaders that were, they were well-read, some of them, but a lot of them wanted to position themselves. I would say to bring it to the real estate world, if somebody is trying to do a flip or make money on day one, that's the person that's in real estate world that's probably has a lot to lose and is thinking very short term. Whereas someone that knows over time they're going to make that equity back, has the tactical patience to own land. If this was in the 1800s, we would be landowners, right? But we're in the 2020s. That buying real estate is the right thing to do because it's a good thing for your personal equity as a family, or you're buying, as a rental income or something that's going to be for your kids. Then that's, I think, the significant difference is that someone isn't in this to make a quick 3%. Someone is in this for the long term to double their money. Does that make sense?
Oh, I love it. I love how you talk about like short-term thinking, like kind of star chasers or return chasers.
Yeah.
But if you don't think of it from an enduring freedom perspective, right? Like long-term legacy, there's a huge difference in those leaders
Sure.
who are thinking more OER versus, hey, how does this look for the next generation? And it's beautiful because in real estate, the estate is so important. You know, you just bought a property, and that's property's probably going to go into your family, and you're thinking about the long term versus, yeah, you could probably move that money to a more short term product or vehicle, but you know the benefits and holding is only going to be more fruitful. So no, I love that, and what I hear most is really patience, because we live in this world where we want it now, you know, especially with AI right now. You get the answer immediately, and really, with real estate, you got to let things matriculate. You got to make things really kind of set its course before you even make a decision. Because 10 years ago, Colorado Springs wasn't the city that it is now. And so if you were trying to just buy and sell in a small moment, you really didn't see the value of holding it for 10 years.
That's right. And I think it can be overwhelming, especially for first-time buyers or even, you know, long-term investors. So, you know, the aperture is wide. And so what I would say is you should narrow that. You know, if I was you, my best clients would be those that know exactly what they want. And what I mean by that is, if you're a first-time home buyer or you're a young family that's planning to have kids, you should not buy the house that you want today. You should buy the house, even if you can't afford it, figure out how you can afford it, right, with financial terms, or wait, but buy the house that you're going to need in 10 years, right? So let's say you're a young couple and you don't have any kids yet, but you want to have 2 or 3 kids. You should buy the house that you can grow into. On the same note, if you just want to buy an investment property that you plan to rent or live in for a couple of years and then rent when you leave, buy a house that you can sacrifice in, whether it's too big, too small for you, but that's at a right price point that you can afford, sacrifice during a tour while you're stationed here, and then re-rent while you're gone. And so take the aperture that's this big and overwhelming and really reduce it so that you are only looking at a very tight target. Does that make sense?
Oh, of course. It reminds me of, was it Napoleon's strategy, defeat in detail? There's this huge war going on, but you really just got to focus on the most decisive operations while sustaining the other battles.
That's right.
And so I love that in terms of defeating in detail. Now, another thing that I think is, you know, a lot of veterans maybe have felt defeated over time is that transition period. And that transition period, I think, is the most vulnerable. I talk to a lot of clients and agents when they're, you know, transitioning from a buy to a sell or sell to a buy, or an agent moving from brokerage to brokerage. You know, you're going from A to B. And so that transition, I think you're in your most vulnerable state because you're thinking about your current situation and then what the future situation will look like and then all the challenges along the way. And, you know, what was your transition like? Because you went from, you know, Hollywood Army, all the great, you know, duty stations experience, and then right into Manhattan. I mean, that's a crazy transition. It's almost like you didn't let off the pedal.
And most don't, actually. It's interesting because you'll hear a lot of people talking about double dipping, you know, keeping or getting their last active duty paycheck and first civilian paycheck. So a couple points. One is on just transition writ large. You know, the military, because we're a not-for-profit organization, we can take overages, right? So if a staff officer or if an officer arrives to a staff or an organization without a job title and they're not that good, they're just going to get put on a staff and they're going to row, right? I mean, you remember the amount assistant S3s that battalions can carry, right? And there's going to be your go-to AS3, and then there's going to be the AS3s that, or the land management or the ammo, whatever. And so that's not the truth in the civilian world, right? If you're not directly contributing to the revenue cycle, right? There's a revenue cycle. And if you're not contributing to that, you're overage and you're going to get cut. And so you have to know that. The second thing I will say is pivoting versus continuing. And so an Army doctor, an Army dentist, an Army, X-ray tech, those three people, after serving 10 years, can reasonably feel like they're going to do their 11th year in the civilian sector. If they do 20 years, they can reasonably think that they're going to do their 21st year. That's not the case with the rest, right? Logisticians, infantry guys, it doesn't matter. If you did something else, more than likely you're going to have to pivot, meaning you will have to take a sacrifice on title, sacrifice on pay, because you're going into the civilian world. And so a 20-year infantry officer or a 20-year infantry NCO cannot reasonably expect to go into the civilian world and do their 21st year in sales, in medical device, in really anything, because they're pivoting, right? They'll take all their leadership, but they're pivoting sectors because they're not a one-for-one like a doctor, a dentist, an X-ray tech. And so that's a big nomenclature misnomer that people think, oh, I make this much, I had this much experience, I'm going to go do this. And so I think that's important for veterans to understand.
Man, I love the overage, topic.
Oh, and the staffs.
I wish.
Unfortunately.
It's so funny.
What, don't you wish in your firm you could have overage?
Oh, man. I would be lethal.
Because you love people, right?
I'd be lethal.
Yeah.
It'd be a sweatshop. It'd be so bad. But that's so funny to talk about overage, because I think that's almost a false confidence in a lot of leadership's command, because they have so much overage. You essentially have so much knowledge and work and labor happening that in the corporate world, time is money. And if you can't have all this staff, because one, you can't support it, and two, you're going to have to produce in a timely manner. And so it's pretty interesting to talk about that. It's so funny.
The Army, I'm sure every service, but the Army does this thing of inflating our OERs, right? And essentially telling us that we walk on waters, and and it's interesting. It was Mark Milley who, when he was the Chief of Staff of the Army, who said, "Don't believe your OERs." And that hurt, right? Because my OERs were great at the time. And he said, "Don't believe your OERs." And so you get told by the Army, "Oh, you're so great, you can do this, you can do that." And when you get to the civilian sector, guess what? You can be great, you can be good, you can be a man of all trades, a Swiss Army knife, but if you're not contributing to that bottom dollar, if you're not making those sales, then guess what? You're not that great.
I love it. And anyways, I don't want to get on to that topic because I could talk all day about that. No, and great advice about pivoting and continuing.
That's right.
And having that kind of face-to-face in the mirror, like, am I pivoting or am I continuing?
Yeah.
And if you're pivoting, you got to prepare. And if you're continuing, it's probably a little bit more user-friendly. You just
That's
probably
right,
have to get a little bit more, higher expertise in that trade or something. But if you could sit down with, let's say, E5 or an 01, 02, 03, a young officer, young enlisted, and they're transitioning, or even an older officer or retiree, do you give the advice differently? Like, what would you give them as advice? Do you give a younger serviceman different advice in terms of transitioning, or would you give an older service member different advice?
So I speak to the Hiring Our Heroes cohort every quarter. And, this is kind of, the answer is prepare to humble yourself. Prepare to the same excitement and feeling you had when you entered the service, you're going to have when you're leaving the service. You should have, anyways. And so, but you got to humble yourself, because there, a lot of people go on the MyPay website and it says what they should make, or, that includes their commissary privileges and gym privileges and all that. And then they make that their bottom line when they go and, negotiate their salary. Some, very few, I would say, that can hold true. And I would believe that probably less than 3%. The majority, you need to humble yourself, because you're going into a world that is new. And so the E1s, the E5s, the O1s, the O3s do that much better than the people that did 20 years. Because the people that did 20 years, they have 20 years of inflated OERs where, they're the best of the best of the best. And now they think they should be the best of the best of the best on their day one. And that's not necessarily true. And so because of that, you get two things that happen. You have a lot of military entrepreneurs, because they get fed up with the system and they go and start their own businesses. And they thrive at it because the military has helped them, MDMP or fill gaps or be, entrepreneurial. And so that's great. But it also sets people up for almost like a slap in the face, because it's like on day one, you are not going to be called lieutenant colonel or colonel. And so it sets them up for disappointment. And, those choose one or the other, start their own business or just say, I'm done.
Yeah. No, I love it. It's such good advice, because, I left technically in 2021 and during COVID, because I was in the Guard at the time, and I was like, I'm done with this. And it's so funny, because before I went to the Guard, I was finished with active duty. I was only in the Guard for like 3 years. And I was like a homeless veteran. I remember I would sit in my bed with a beard looking like Taliban. And I remember Lana was like, you need to figure this out. And that's today.
Yeah.
And I remember.
So you speak from experience.
Oh,
you know what I'm talking about.
And I thought and it's so funny. I wish I knew. It was like, I wasn't prepared to pivot.
Yeah.
And I thought I was just going to continue into some sort of like business. And
well, it's interesting, because I remember your last assignment, you were a commander, right? In active duty.
Active duty, yeah.
And so you commanded 100 and whatever guys.
200
and
plus.
Yeah. You see what I'm saying? You had a right-hand man.
Yeah, James.
And so you feel like you get out and you're going to like, okay, where's my next force of 200? Where's my right-hand man? I mean, listen, a very humbling experience that I can share is that when I retired, I couldn't schedule my own meetings, right? Because I had a little mini staff that would help me. And so, yeah, it's a humbling experience that we all will experience depending on what level you're at. And you need to be ready for it. And you're not necessarily welcome it, right? It's almost like this, oh man, like I deserve to be a company commander on the outside and have 200 people and have a first sergeant and have an XO. The revenue cycles of the civilian sector are just not built for
Oh, it's brutal. It's
every man for himself.
It's so it's such a. We could talk all day about that. So, in the midst of the Book of David, in that chapter, I imagine there was little chapters about real estate.
Yeah.
When did you buy your first property?
Yeah. So this is very unfortunate, because the model I followed, unfortunately, the socioeconomic environment is, the lieutenants and captains of today can't do that. But, my secret sauce, and I owe it all to my mom. My mom had a third grade formal education. And so when I asked her, I had all this deployment money, right? I'm a, officer with all these back-to-back deployments, tax-free money. I said, what do I do with this money? And she said, just buy property. And so, my mom, being a very humble background, coming from Mexico as a teenager, I think she knew that being a landowner was important. And so she said, mijo, buy property. And so when I was a lieutenant, bought my first condo in in Hawaii as part of 25th ID. And I just did that. Every time I moved to a certain location, I would buy property. And this is where my secret sauce was that I share with everybody, but unfortunately, most people can't follow this. So, 20% down, you avoid PMI. That's primary mortgage insurance, which is if you don't put 20% down, you'll have to pay PMI. So if you can save up enough to put PMI or 20% down, you avoid an additional fee cost that you don't get back. And so 20% is the key. The second thing is negotiate your rate down on a 30-year loan, but then have enough so that you can, at the end, tell your financier that you want the 15% rate. So you've negotiated down on a 30% rate, but the reality is on a 15-year rate, it's much lower, but it's a higher monthly. And so, again, I'm sorry that most people can't do this today, but once you have that 20%, you negotiate on the 30% terms, and then at the end, cut that you almost cut it in half. And so I'll give you a great story. In a home I bought in Tennessee, I negotiated a 30-year loan down to, at the time it was like a 5.9% on the 30-year loan. And then I said, wait a minute, what if I do this on a 15-year loan? Came down to 2.9. This was before the 2%.
Before, yeah.
And so a 2.9 rate was unheard of. Now, the mortgage, the numbers are, your mortgage on a 30-year loan is probably like $1,500. Your mortgage on a 15-year loan is probably more like $2,300. And so, do you see the difference? It's an $800 a month. But if you can do it, you're only paying a 2.9 rate at that point. And so again, the two bits of advice that I would give anybody looking now is one, buy real estate. Two, get 20%, accumulate 20%. And I did it during wartime. The veterans or active duty of today may have to do 2 or 3 assignments to accumulate 20%. But accumulate that 20%, you get rid of PMI, then negotiate a 30-year loan, and then cut that in half so you're paying 15-year loan.
So you're exactly right. I think that's incredible advice because if you can save for a down payment, it helps, with the cost, with the PMI. It helps reduce the payment. I agree. It's a little challenging for military, right, to save up. They need a couple of duty stations. Hopefully we don't have to go back to war with back-to-back deployments. But, I would say if there's a will, there's a way. And then I love the idea of, negotiate that rate hard. And if you can support a 15-year, do it. But if not, do your best. And I would say in this market, buyers' concessions are more than vibrant, more than real. Not to toot our horn, but we have almost $150,000 in buyers' concessions that we have secured this year. And that's between seller concessions and inspection objections. So, even though the market's hard, you can find concessions that will push that rate down. But I want to get into some more juicy stuff. I know you got a portfolio, but what was the worst property you had during your career?
Man, honestly, I'm an anomaly. I did not have a bad property.
No way.
Yeah. I didn't. I had great renters. Here's the thing. I did not. People will tell you to buy in the best school districts, which I think is great advice because you market to a certain demographic, right? They have kids. Remember, I did all of this with no kids because I think proximity is also important. But here's the reality, and this is very unfortunate for Americans across our nation, is that we're getting to a point where real estate is becoming a luxury. It's and I served as a diplomat in Latin America, and I saw that, in Latin America, they've eradicated their middle class. And so you have your haves and you have your have-nots. And so if you go to a restaurant in Latin America, chances are the person that's serving you, had to take a couple modes of public transportation to get there, doesn't live anywhere near the place where they're eating, right? I don't know if in our lifetime that's going to happen, but we're doing that slowly here, where we're eradicating our middle class. And so you're going to have your haves and you're going to have your have-nots. And so my point about real estate being a luxury, that should encourage you to buy real estate and to be part of the haves. Not that real estate will make you a have, but owning real estate and owning land is a luxury. And so you need to put yourself in a position where you can, be a landowner, be a real estate owner. And so, sorry, Ryan, what was the question? Or
no, it was the worst. You didn't have the worst property.
Sorry,
but
I did not have a bad one.
You did have to. You answered it, but then you were getting on some good stuff. I love that topic about home ownership as a luxury, and I think it should be encouraging at the same time frightening, because we could enter a world where real estate is just unattainable, and we live in subsidized housing or government provided, whatever the case is, because it's gotten so expensive.
That's right.
And we live in a renting nation where no one truly owns anything. And so that's I would say that's probably the best advice to hear. If you don't remember anything, remember to buy before it's too late. Now, looking back, how has real estate impact your family's financial future?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, you need capital, right, to be able to free yourself, because in this world, there's different levels of, I think, the wealth, right, the wealth cycle. And so when you begin, you trade your time hourly for money. And you really want to get to the point where you're trading your money for passive income, not for your time anymore, right? So you start out with your time, and that's, I started working at McDonald's when I was 16, and that was an hourly wage. And then you work your way through education or experience or time for salary, and then you're at salary. But you really want to get to a point where you're exchanging assets for passive income, because that's where you're not having to give up your time for money. And you can only do that when you reach a certain level of assets or capital. And so, for my family, that's probably my biggest struggle. It's a very first world struggle, but my struggle is, how do I raise my kids in an environment where they learn the value of $1? I grew up very poor, very humble. I remember my mom and I counting pennies to make the rent. My kids won't have to do that. And so that's my challenge. How do I make my kids learn the value of $1? And that's a struggle, but I think we do that by not giving them everything they want and making them work for things so that they learn the value of $1. Does that make sense?
I would say that's every parents, goal, right? And it's tougher when you can provide abundantly. And I would say it's something that's that character building at home, if you will. But even if you can't provide as abundantly, stories like you who were counting pennies are now counting houses, counting real estate, right? So I think both win in the end, because if you have a parent that is, has the intention to provide more character building experiences, regardless if they can provide or not, they will, I think, ultimately win. But it is a very challenging, goal. But I think you summarize it great, because that real estate journey that you had and that military journey, your goal is to essentially humble your children and to get them ready for the real world. And I think that's probably one of the better gifts you can give your children than a house, right? because that house could go away in 20. Even if they sell it, but if they have that character to start again, to keep moving forward, in terms of adversity, I mean that's priceless. So why do you continue serving? Because you had this incredible career, you had an incredible civilian career, you have retirement, you are set with your properties. You don't need. You could be selfish. It's okay to be selfish.
I mean, is it? It's interesting. Just a couple hours ago, we culminated a robotics camp for kids that were 7th to 9th grade. That we found sponsors, and we taught them for a week robotics. That took a week away from my time. And that it's interesting because as I was going out to look for sponsors and tell people about it, and I sit on a couple boards of affordable housing, this robotics for kids. I'll talk to people to try to get them engaged. People that are well off that I know can either sponsor with money or sponsor with time, and you almost get these looks like, why would I do that? And there's some selfish people out there, and I got to tell you, I was selfish. If I wasn't selfish with my time, I would not have gained the success that I gained at such a young age. That's the truth in lending. But I think I reached a certain point. Honestly, I think it was in the White House when I was serving. I was working in the Chief of Staff office, working in the West Wing. And I think I had this cathartic moment where I said, I've done this to get here, but what have I done to put a rear view mirror up and help people that were in my situation get here? And I think that cathartic moment made me live by the ideals of work hard, have fun, and help others. And so I'm still working hard. I'm having fun doing it, but you got to help others. Because if you don't help others, where is the pay it forward, right? People like Colin Powell gave me sage advice. And if someone of that magnitude, of that gravitas, of that stature can take the time out of their day to help a guy like me, well, I got to help people. And so I think that's the selfless piece of it. But there's also a selfish part of this. And that selfish part of this is that if we don't help the next generation become better and become part of the middle class, there's going to be a revolution. There's going to be a revolution of the haves and have-nots. And that's where your kids, my kids, and those assets are at risk. Because this has happened before. This is in history. This is not novel. And so we have a duty to help those that can't help themselves. We have a duty to create opportunities for those that don't have those opportunities so that they can be members of the middle class. Does that make sense?
Duty, honor, real estate is what this podcast is about.
Okay.
That's so serendipitous, I guess, because the brokerage I'm a part of, we have work hard, be kind.
Yeah.
And you just said that. And it's so you put really the purpose behind work hard, be kind. So the task is to work hard, be kind. But the purpose is to prevent a revolution. And I
hopefully
love it.
not in our lifetime, but I will tell you, I can't take credit for that. I attended a wedding for a distant family relative, and the house was amazing. This was in South Carolina. And the guy that was hosting the wedding at their house was someone that employed someone that cleaned their house. And so I get invited to this wedding, and I'm sitting in this beautiful property in South Carolina, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, this person cleans their house, and this person went out of their way to host their wedding at their house.
Wow.
And so, I make a connection. This person flew in a private plane.
Wow.
And so, I trade emails with this person, and their email signature block said, "Work hard, have fun, and help others." And they lived by that, right? And unfortunately, that person is no longer with us. They they got cancer and they passed away. But I think that was impactful for me because it was like, this person is hosting a wedding at their house for someone that cleans their house. They didn't have to do that.
Wow.
Right? And so it's about helping others. It's about having fun, and it's about working hard, right? I think I would feel guilty, and it sucks sometimes, right? Because I still have this crazy schedule where I only sleep 5 hours a night, sometimes 4 hours a night, but I have to work hard. The military instilled that in me, right? But at least I'm having fun doing it, and I'm helping others doing it. And there's some selfish people out there. There's some selfish people that are just doing their work and infinite tennis lessons for themselves and not helping others. And there's going to be a judgment day, and that's okay.
Ooh.
And so, I think it's about, I try to live by my motto.
Oh my God, I'm scared.
You should be.
I know.
We're all going to have a judgment day.
It brings so much more passion and purpose to what we're doing. I was thinking about my cleaning service, Veronica Jashel. She's amazing. So if you need a cleaning service, get her on schedule. But no, it's so funny because her kids are growing.
Yeah.
And I feel like it hit home for a second. But so then, if there's a revolution pending, how are we going to create more leaders in our communities? In my role as a real estate professional broker, I feel I do my part residentially and commercially through putting, great buyers into homes, helping sell properties to new buyers and growing the city. But in commercial, it's been incredible because you can change cities. You can change the trajectory of a city by bringing new employers, bringing more business. And I feel like that's my way of helping the leadership in the community. But in your experience, how are we going to help bring or foster more leaders?
Oh, I think that's it's an open-ended question, but I think there's barriers to entry, right? And I think it's about breaking those barriers or educating people so that they can break their own barriers, right? I don't believe in giving anything out for free. I think I probably got some handouts that I didn't even know about because of programs. But, there's no doubt that I worked hard. The hardest working person I know is my mother. And she's in her 80s, and she still works harder than me. And so, don't expect or wait for a handout. Work hard. And I think hard work is rewarded. But I think it's about breaking barriers or helping people break their own barriers so that they can thrive on their own and reward hard work, right? We don't want to, reward laziness. And so, I think in your field, my field, I think it's about rewarding hard work so that they themselves can get to a level where they can be homeowners, where they can be middle class, where they can be thriving in society, right? My poor mom, who's gratefully, she's still alive, she worked so hard. There was days where she would work 3 jobs, right, so we could make the rent. And I think, I think we're creating a society that is waiting for a handout or waiting for someone to come help. You got to help yourself first. You got to work hard, and then you got to use that to catapult yourself, using the programs that are available to catapult yourself into a thriving middle class. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And I think you and I are in a position to help create some of those opportunities.
No, it's funny. After the military, I would say I was pretty selfish, because I wanted to get this MBA and go to a business. And then I ended up working for my wife, the boss, Bryan Rodriguez Group. And I wasn't happy because it wasn't on what I wanted. But over time, I started realizing that I was serving others through real estate.
Yeah.
Because, it's a profound time in people's lives. It's glamorized in TV shows, but the real estate is families in transition that have, had a life event occurred, right? Someone dies, someone get a new job, someone lost a job, triggers a real estate transaction, if you will. And so that's a real humbling moment when you are part of that process and getting them out of that life event, because naturally the first thing to go is like, oh, we got to liquidate or we got to move up. And so that it's incredible to hear, to just, what we talked about this whole time in figuring out how to find better leaders. But it takes time, and I think if all other leaders are working together and pushing towards that, I think it's just going to be really contagious. And it got to the point where finally I now joined a board too, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce here in Colorado Springs, and that's been real awakening for me, because I'm seeing that other business leaders, all they need is just a little hand, just to help them up to that next level.
Sure.
And just being a part of grand openings and helping them figure out to get in the right resource to either open up the next business or find another partner or network, really just adds like a byproduct, a multiple in the environment, because they're gonna take that experience and then continue it to the next person, below them, and so bring them up. And so, no, this has been really, really exciting. A lot of reflection here. I'll tell you, this is probably the most rewarding, I think, podcast we've had yet. So I can't thank you enough.
It.
But before we go, 10 years are going to pass. And so what's the one thing you hope someone remembers in this podcast?
I think it's probably, work hard, have fun, and help others. The dynamic of the socioeconomy is changing, and some of that is for the better, but some of that is for the worse. And so, if I had not achieved the success I have achieved, I would be really worried about my kids and their future and what's their home buying experience going to be, right? And I think, in the end, a good government is going to have to come to the rescue for people that can't. But that comes at a cost, right? It comes at a cost for taxpayers. And so I think COVID helped kind of influence this selfish attitude. But in the end of the day, we have to look out for those that can't look out for themselves. And I would just hope that, I think at the beginning, people have to be selfish to make it, right? It's about you. You got to get your high school diploma, get whatever degree, certification, labor certification you can get to make it. But then in the end, it's like, how do we share and be good citizens, right? It's not about Republicans and Democrats. It's not about conservatives and liberals. It's about this great society that we need to create for the betterment of ourselves, right? It's, we're in this very polarized state that has labels and titles, and in the end, I think we have a lot more in common with each other. And so I hope in 10 years we're in a better state than we are today, because we're very polarized, and we see each other as enemies, and we see each other as adversaries, and that's not a good place to be in. So I hope that that's a takeaway, and I hope that in 10 years we're in a better place.
Selfish to selfless.
Yeah.
I love it. How we're going to grow to better everyone. And so, man, I got so much thinking to do after this. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. This has been an incredible episode. There's so many more to come. And if you want to follow Dave Schulz, he's on social media. He's on LinkedIn. So reach out to him. He's a kind heart and a great mentor. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Bryan.